Did you ever come to a point of feeling burnout?
What is burnout? It's a relative term. I think everybody, if you ask 10 people, well, don't you think you probably get 10 different answers to burnout? I have a pretty good trigger inside me. I do deal with this in the first book too. I actually talk about a time in our first term when we were in Liberia, living in the jungle in Tapita. It's the name of the place. We had, like I said, we had electricity 3 hours a day. I used a wringer washer. Yes, I used a wringer washer, just like my grandmothers and great-grandmothers did. I had cloth diapers with Stephanie, so we had to go out there and do that. We did all these things. That wasn't the burnout. And I didn't really burn out that first term, but when you don't have anything to gauge, when you don't have any relativity, you don't have anything to go by, when you're young it's, yes, life is hard, but when you live 20 years, 20, 30 more years, and then you look back, I look at that first 5 years of our ministry and go, you aren't even anywhere near any kind of burnout. It was more a cultural collisions, I call them. I term that these things that I didn't know how to, my body, my mind, I didn't know how to deal with. And there was one time in there when we'd only been there probably a year, and I think Stephanie might have been a baby. And Jeff was a pilot. He was a bush pilot. There were 5 of them on the mission compound. We had 6 houses, a Bible school, a dispensary, an obstetric clinic, and stuff like that. It was a pretty nice compound. But he did a lot of the flying, so he was coming and going. The pilots were always coming and going to villages, flying medical flights for people, or going to Monrovia, picking up groceries or people, whatever. So he was coming and going a lot. He was out in the villages. I was kind of right there in that house. So one time I said to him, get me out of this jungle right now. I have to get out of this jungle. So I have a trigger in me. A lot of people, I think we all do, because burnout to me is not a God-ordained thing. I do not think that burnout is something God ever requires of us. Giving out, spilling out. I think of that song, Broken and Spilled Out, and I talk a little bit about that in my book. I've struggled with that song, the essence of that song, for a long time. But burnout is something we do to ourselves. And there's one main reason, I'll discuss this too later. I think it's actually in the second book when I did burn out, the time I did, is that burnout comes from pride. Burnout comes because we feel like nobody else can do it as well as we can, or we are just not quitters and we just determined to see it through. And there's nothing wrong with seeing something through. We are fixers and we determine to fix it before we stop. Some things can't be fixed. Some things we can't. Some things we're not called to fix. Some things we aren't able. We're human. We're not God. It was really hard for me during this. The second book is called In Every Place. It opens up where the first book ended. The first book ends with the birth of Lauren and our evacuation from Liberia. A year later, we took an 11-month-old baby and our 2 older girls and flew to Ivory Coast to do relief work with the Liberian refugees that had fled Liberia because they were in full-blown civil war by then. So a lot of the Liberians were going over into Ivory Coast, and we wanted to help them so bad. We wanted to fix this so badly. We went into Ivory Coast and went into the bush area way on the border of Liberia where it borders Ivory Coast. And we worked there for a year. The United Nations will tell you, we found out later, the United Nations, Salvation Army, Red Cross, all of them, in heavy, intense relief area, refugee areas, as we were in, where the war is still hot and it's very, the people that have crossed over to the other country, they're still what you call raw. It's just they haven't settled, they haven't found a new center yet or what to do. You only are supposed to be in there for about 3 months. A relief worker can only handle about 3 months of intense relief work. We didn't know that. It's 1991. no one knew that. I mean, we didn't know that. We lived in the town of Pay. This is in the second book. It was the most spiritually oppressed place I've ever lived, except for in some places in Jamaica where we actually went and ministered, which is very heavy into witchcraft, and some of you know that. But in this little town of Pay, I was reading the Frank Peretti books at the same time, which probably wasn't a good idea. If you've read any of the Frank Perettis, I could just see the talons and hear the flapping of the dark black wings over that town. I'm serious, it was that dark. It was so bad that when we finally moved into this other town, Tulipla, which was a larger town than Pay, thousands of people would line up at our doors. When I say within a week's time, we would have lines of thousands of people line up for aid. We had some monetary aid. We had medicines mainly. We had a nurse with us. They were so desperate because desperate times sometimes bring desperate measures. And some of these people were so desperate that they would take a sick baby, a genuinely sick baby, and pass it down to the next person behind them. Pass down, change the blanket so that they could get money, just to whatever. They used the same baby dozens of times to get aid from us. And it was just a very hard place to be because I'm a fixer, I'm a caregiver in a lot of ways. And I had this baby myself. I had this toddler and 2 girls I'm trying to homeschool. We're trying to live with the door, just constantly people at the door. They didn't come in, they were at the door, and some of us had to deal with it. I just started shutting down. And there was one time when I knew that burnout had hit me because we couldn't fix things. Some pastors had come to see Jeff and 2 of the other missionary men, and they sat in our living room. And they came, their requests were so ridiculous. They were so far-fetched. It wasn't like, can we have a roof for our church? They wanted us to buy all of them motorcycles, and they wanted a bus. They wanted us to buy a bus, and it was these big things that they wanted after we had been ministering to them for a year. And people that know me are going to laugh at this probably. It's not something it's not something I'm proud of, but I was so burned out by that time that I wasn't even in the meeting really, but I was kind of coming and going. I actually came and stood in the middle of the meeting and started yelling, screaming at those men. Jeff had to take me by the arm and take me to the bedroom and mandate that I stay there till it was over. I was that gone. But our field administrator from Baptist Missions had come out to see, because we were going back and forth into Liberia, mostly the men, trying to help them in Liberia. Then we had the refugees here. We were a mess. It was big. He mandated that we go home for 6 weeks. The ones of us that had been there a year, he said, "You are wise. It saved our lives. It saved our ministries." But as we got on the airplane, I had allowed, when burnout is able to just to completely go full blown, all these other things come: bitterness, anger, blame, all of it. I sat on the airplane and I looked into my soul, which was like a war zone. My soul was like those people had come from. And I started crying, and Jeff woke up and he held my hand, and I said to him in the middle of the plane, and I don't think I shouted. I'm sure I don't think I shouted. I don't think I did. But I said to him, I hate those people, and don't ever ask me to come back. That's what happens when we try to take too many things on ourselves. We try to fix things that we aren't called to fix. I couldn't fix those thousands of people. So yes, that was the time that I burned out, and it didn't end pretty.